A boat engine roars across the Illinois River, and then the water erupts. Dozens of silver-scaled bodies launch into the air, 10, 20, 30 pounds of muscle catapulting 10 feet above the surface, arcing like living shrapnel before crashing back into the murk. This is not nature behaving as intended. This is an invasion. The Mississippi River. 2,300 miles of current, draining 41% of the continental United States. 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces feed water into its basin, a network of tributaries, floodplains, and backwaters that together form one of the most biologically productive freshwater systems on Earth. For centuries, this river has sustained economies, shaped cultures, and harbored an extraordinary diversity of aquatic life. More than 260 species of fish call the Mississippi Basin home. But today, the balance of that system faces a threat unlike any in its modern history, a threat that arrived not by accident of nature, but by deliberate human decision. The Asian carp. For species, bighead, silver, grass, and black, imported from China in the early 1970s to solve a problem in southern aquaculture ponds. What followed was one of the most consequential ecological miscalculations in American freshwater history. The fish escaped. They multiplied. And they transformed the rivers they entered. In some stretches of the Illinois River today, invasive carp account for 70% of the total fish biomass. Native species, largemouth bass, crappie, paddlefish, gizzard shad, have been outcompete, their food supply consumed by an invader that eats constantly and reproduces at staggering rates. But this is not only a story of destruction. It is also a story of adaptation. Of fishermen and scientists and river communities turning crisis into opportunity. Of millions of pounds of invasive fish hauled from American waters each year, processed, and shipped around the world. And of a river system that, against long odds, is beginning to fight back. Hello my friends, welcome to American Fishing Atlas. Subscribe to the channel, share and like. Thank you. To understand the scale of this crisis, it helps to understand the fish at its center. The silver carp, Hypothalamichthys mollitrix, is the most visible and arguably the most destructive of the 4 species. Native to the major river drainages of eastern China and Siberia, the silver carp is a filter feeder. It possesses no stomach. Instead, a specialized gill apparatus fused into a sponge like filter traps particles as small as 4 microns, phytoplankton, zooplankton, bacteria, detritus, and processes them continuously. The fish eats in effect all the time. Adults reach 3 feet in length and commonly weigh 20 to 30 pounds, though specimens exceeding 80 pounds have been documented in American waters. A single female can carry as many as 2 million eggs, a reproductive output that dwarfs most native freshwater species. Sexual maturity arrives between 4 and 6 years of age. Spawning requires flowing water and temperatures between 63 and 79 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions the Mississippi and its tributaries provide in abundance every spring. And then, there is the jumping. Silver carp in North American waters exhibit a behavior rarely seen in their native Asian range. When startled by the vibration of a boat engine, they launch themselves as high as 10 feet into the air. The spectacle is both astonishing and dangerous. Broken jaws, concussions, cracked ribs, boaters on infested rivers have reported injuries that range from alarming to life-threatening. Water skiing in silver carp territory has become, for practical purposes, impossible. The bighead carp, Hypothalamichthys nobilis, is the silver's larger, calmer cousin. Growing upward of 5 feet and exceeding 100 pounds, the bighead does not jump. But it consumes enormous quantities of zooplankton, directly competing with the larval stages of nearly every native fish species in the basin. Together, silver and bighead carp form a 1-2 punch that strikes at the foundation of the river food web. Grass carp, Tenepharingodonidella, target aquatic vegetation, stripping submerged plant beds that serve as nursery habitat for bass, bluegill, and dozens of other species. A single grass carp can consume up to 40% of its body weight in vegetation per day, capable of clearing entire beds of submerged aquatic plants in weeks. The consequences cascade through the ecosystem. Without vegetation, juvenile fish lose cover, invertebrate populations collapse, and water clarity deteriorates as the roots that once held sediment in place disappear. Black carp, Mylopharingodon pisceus, are the least numerous but perhaps the most surgically destructive of the four. Growing to over 3 feet in length, they possess pharyngeal teeth capable of crushing the shells of native freshwater mussels, organisms that filter water, stabilize river substrates, and support dozens of other species. Many of these mussels are already federally listed as endangered. The black carp's arrival in established populations, confirmed by U.S. Geological Survey research in the Mississippi Basin, represents an existential threat to species that have no evolutionary defense against such a predator. For species, for distinct strategies of ecological disruption, and all of them thriving in a river system that offered everything they needed and nothing they feared. The story of how these fish arrived is, in hindsight, a cautionary tale. In the early 1970s, fish farmers in Arkansas and other southern states began importing Asian carp from China to control nuisance algae blooms in catfish ponds and wastewater treatment lagoons. The logic was straightforward. The fish were voracious filter feeders, cheap to maintain, and effective at keeping water clean. Federal and state agencies supported the introductions, but containment proved impossible. By the 1980s, silver and bighead carp were appearing in open waterways. Flooding, including the catastrophic Great Flood of 1993, which inundated tens of thousands of acres across the Midwest, accelerated their dispersal. Though some sources point to the 1993 flood as the singular moment of escape, the reality is more complex. Bighead carp were established in the Mississippi Basin before 1990. Grass carp had been reproducing in the river since the 1970s. The floods did not create the invasion. They accelerated what was already underway. Within a decade, the fish had colonized the lower and middle Mississippi, the Ohio River, the Missouri, and the Illinois. They moved with a relentlessness that stunned biologists. A 20-year study in the upper Mississippi Basin confirmed what fishermen already knew. Asian carp were outcompeting native sport fish across the system, restructuring ecosystems that had been stable for centuries. The ecological damage was devastating, but the human consequences were equally profound. Along the Illinois River, communities that had depended on recreational fishing for generations watched their economies erode. Crappie and catfish populations declined. Anglers stopped coming. Charter captains lost bookings. Bait shops closed. In towns like Havana and Bath, Illinois, the economic infrastructure that had been built around sport fishing, the motels, the marinas, the guide services, the riverside restaurants, found its customer base evaporating as the river filled with fish that nobody came to catch. The frustration bred creativity. In Bath, the redneck fishing tournament became an annual spectacle, boaters armed with nets racing through silver carp waters, scooping leaping fish from the air. Part competition, part protest, part community catharsis. The events drew national media attention and underscored a grim reality. These rivers had been fundamentally altered. In the broader Mississippi Basin, the numbers were staggering. Asian carp represented up to 90% of the fish biomass in some stretches of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Native mussels, critical to water filtration and ecosystem health, faced predation from black carp. Paddlefish, an ancient species that had survived since the Cretaceous period, found their plankton food supply consumed before they could reach it. The federal response intensified. In 2002, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completed an experimental electric barrier in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, the man-made waterway that connects the Mississippi Basin to the Great Lakes via the Illinois River and Lake Michigan. The stakes were enormous. The Great Lakes support a $7 billion a year fishing industry and a $16 billion tourism economy. If invasive carp established populations in the lakes, the consequences would be catastrophic. The barrier was a beginning, but it was not a solution. Tagged carp were detected within miles of the barrier during high water conditions. Environmental DNA, genetic material shed by fish into the water, was found beyond the barrier on multiple occasions. The urgency of a more permanent defense grew with each passing year. That defense took shape as the Rebranding Road Interbasin Project, a billion-dollar, multi-layered barrier system at the Rebranding Road Lock and Dam near Joliet, Illinois, identified as the critical choke point between the Mississippi and Great Lakes watersheds. The project combines acoustic deterrents, air bubble curtains, enhanced electric barriers, and a specially engineered flushing lock designed to prevent carp from hitchhiking through in the wake of barge traffic. Construction began in early 2025 following a landmark partnership agreement between Illinois, Michigan, and the Army Corps of Engineers. The federal government committed to funding 90% of the estimated $1.15 billion cost. But while the fight to protect the Great Lakes consumed headlines and federal budgets, something quieter and equally remarkable was happening downstream. Fishermen were fighting back. In the early 2010s, a handful of entrepreneurs began to see what biologists had long recognized. The Mississippi Basin held an almost inexhaustible supply of high-quality protein in the form of invasive carp. The fish are clean, filter feeders, not bottom feeders. Their flesh is white, mild, and high in omega-3 fatty acids. In China, where silver and bighead carp have been farmed and consumed for over 1,000 years, these species are among the most prized freshwater fish in the world. In 2012, a Chinese-American businesswoman named Angie Yu arrived in Wickliffe, Kentucky, a small city 2 miles south of the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and founded 2 Rivers Fisheries. Her vision was straightforward: harvest invasive carp from American rivers and process them for export to markets in China and across Asia. By her second year of operation, the first container of whole frozen carp had shipped overseas. The industry grew. Schaefer Fisheries in northern Illinois began moving 10 to 15 million pounds of carp annually, most of it shipped to China. Processing plants opened in Mississippi, Illinois, and Kentucky. Moon River Foods in the Mississippi Delta. Big River Fish Corporation in Pike County, Illinois, secured a $2 million state grant to expand operations and signed export contracts with Chinese buyers. In Wickliffe, an international fisheries industrial park, the first of its kind in the United States, opened on 64 acres, anchored by 2 rivers and joined by a dozen other companies producing everything from fish meatballs to fertilizer. And the results, though incremental, were real. Research from the Illinois Natural History Survey showed that in areas where commercial harvest exceeded 8,000 kilograms per month, zooplankton populations, the foundation of the native food web, began to recover. Gizzard shad, a critical forage fish for bass and crappie, showed improved body condition in reaches where carp numbers had been most aggressively reduced. The commercial export market was a start, but the domestic challenge remained. Americans, by and large, did not eat carp. The resistance was cultural, not culinary. The word carp carried decades of stigma in the American imagination, associated with the common carp, a bottom-feeding European import of the 19th century known for muddy flavor and unappetizing texture. Never mind that silver and bighead carp are entirely different species. Never mind that they are among the most consumed freshwater fish on the planet. In the United States, carp was a four-letter word. Previous attempts at rebranding had come and gone. Kentucky tuna, silverfin, Illinois bass, river rabbit. None had stuck. The bone structure posed an additional challenge, an intricate lacework of intermuscular Y bones that made filleting a 40-pound fish an exercise in patience, yielding barely 4 pounds of boneless strips. But there was precedent for transformation. The Patagonian twofish, an ugly deep-sea species that no American would have touched, was reborn as Chilean sea bass and became a restaurant staple worth billions. The slidehead, a name that practically repelled customers, became the widely popular orange roughy. The question was whether the same alchemy of naming, marketing, and culinary imagination could work for a fish that Americans had been conditioned to despise. Then, in June of 2022, Illinois launched its most ambitious offensive yet, Operation Rebrand. After a 2-year, $600,000 marketing campaign funded in part by the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the state unveiled a new name for invasive carp, Kopi, short for copious, a nod to the staggering abundance of the fish in Midwestern waterways. The campaign was sophisticated, focus group tested, backed by a logo, a website, restaurant partnerships, chef endorsements, and a clear message: this is a clean, healthy, sustainable fish that happens to need eating into submission. Chicago restaurants began serving Kopi burgers, Kopi po' boys, smoked Kopi fillets. Processing shifted toward minced fish products, ground carp pressed through machines that separated bone from flesh, producing a versatile protein suitable for tacos, fish cakes, and bolognese. The numbers moved. Within 2 months of the campaign launch, over 10 million pounds of carp had been removed from the Illinois River, on pace to exceed first-year projections. Processors reported that Kopi was selling out at retail locations. Return customers began appearing. Gordon Food Service committed to nationwide distribution. But the challenges remained immense. An estimated 20 to 50 million pounds of carp could be harvested from the Illinois River alone each year. Hundreds of millions more swim in waterways from the Midwest to the Gulf Coast. The commercial fishing workforce along the river is aging. Most fishermen are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, hauling nets through backbreaking labor with few young replacements entering the trade. And the fundamental mathematics of the invasion remain daunting. A single female silver carp produces up to 2 million eggs per spawning season. The fish have no natural predators in North American waters. Even aggressive harvests barely dent the population in most reaches. As one Illinois fisherman put it, eliminating Asian carp is like digging a hole in dry sand. It keeps filling in as fast as it can be dug. Yet the effort continues. And it continues because the alternative, conceding the Mississippi Basin to an invader, is unacceptable to the communities, fisheries managers, and scientists who have dedicated decades to these waters. The Mississippi River has endured worse than this. Ice ages that reshaped its course. Centuries of damming, dredging, channelizing, and polluting. The near extinction of species that once filled its waters in numbers that stagger the imagination. In the 1960s and 1970s, industrial pollution rendered stretches of the river biologically dead, oxygen levels so low that fish simply could not survive. And yet, when the Clean Water Act began to take effect and the worst pollutants were curtailed, the river recovered. Species returned. Fisheries rebuilt. The ecosystem, given the chance, demonstrated a capacity for renewal that exceeded what most scientists had predicted. And yet the river persists. The paddlefish still glides through its depths. The blue catfish still patrols its channels. The largemouth bass still holds in the shadow of submerged timber, waiting for the strike. The fight against invasive carp is, at its core, a fight for the character of American freshwater. It is a fight waged on multiple fronts, from the billion-dollar engineering of the Brandon Road barrier to the daily labor of commercial fishermen hauling nets in the pre-dawn darkness. From the research labs where biologists track carp movement with acoustic transmitters and environmental DNA, to the processing plants where a fish once dismissed as worthless is being transformed into food, fertilizer, and economic opportunity. From the kitchens of Chicago restaurants where chefs are proving that a good fish does not need a good name to earn a place on the plate, to the state legislatures where funding battles determine whether the next line of defense gets built or deferred. It is an imperfect fight. Underfunded in places, understaffed in others. The fish have a 30-year head start and a reproductive engine that dwarfs any human capacity for removal. But it is a fight being waged with increasing coordination, increasing ingenuity, and a growing recognition that the problem will not be solved by any single strategy, only by all of them, together, sustained over decades. The lessons of the Asian carp invasion extend far beyond fisheries management. They speak to the consequences of introducing species into ecosystems where they do not belong, to the arrogance of assuming containment when dealing with living organisms and flowing water, and to the resilience, stubborn, imperfect, hard won, of communities that refuse to surrender their rivers without a fight. In 2021, China banned all fishing in the Yangtze River and its tributaries for 10 years, a conservation measure that displaced more than 200,000 fishermen. The irony was not lost on the processors of Wycliffe, Kentucky, and the river towns of Illinois. The country that sent these fish to America now needs protein from its waters. A crisis born of human miscalculation has, through decades of struggle, begun to generate its own economy, one that removes harmful fish, creates rural jobs, and sends American harvested protein to markets around the world. It is not enough. Not yet. The carp still outnumber the effort to remove them. The Great Lakes remain at risk. The native species that once defined these waters still struggle under the weight of competition they were never evolved to face. But the trajectory is changing. In reaches where harvest is highest, the zooplankton are returning. The gizzard shad are gaining weight. The food web, slowly, is beginning to reassemble itself. It is not restoration. Not yet. But it is the beginning of a correction, a reminder that even the most damaged systems retain the capacity to recover, given enough pressure in the right direction. The Mississippi will not be rid of Asian carp in this generation. Perhaps not in the next. But the river endures. The fishermen endure. And somewhere along its banks, in a processing plant or a research lab or the hull of a commercial boat at dawn, the work continues, one net, one harvest, one meal at a time. A boat engine starts. The water stirs. But this time, the fish in the net are coming out.